The truth is, some doors were never meant to be opened. And once they're unlocked, there's no turning back. What lies beyond may be more than you can handle, more than any of us can survive. Tonight we begin a story of secrets, of mysteries, and of forces that should never have been awakened. Welcome to Ravenshade. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Arrival. The chill wind swept across the desolate moors, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faintest hint of salt from the distant sea. The sky was an unbroken stretch of gray, thick clouds hanging like an oppressive shroud, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. In the distance, a lone figure trudged along the narrow, winding path, leading to the remote village of Ravenshade. The man, Hercule Poirot, was hardly what one might call a typical visitor to such a forsaken place. With his impeccably styled mustache and sharp, calculating eyes, he cut a striking figure against the bleak landscape. But it wasn't the moors or the fog that had brought him here. It was a letter, a cryptic message written in haste and sealed with a black wax emblem. A request for his presence, signed simply, S. As Poirot approached the village, the air grew colder, and the distant sound of wind howling through the barren trees began to settle into an eerie silence. The village itself was little more than a cluster of stone cottages, their roofs covered in thick moss, windows dimly lit with a warm yellow glow. Yet there was something unsettling about the place. Something that seemed to whisper from the very stones themselves. The detective was greeted by a stoic constable, a tall man with a rough, weathered face who looked as though he had seen far too many unsolved mysteries. "Sir Poirot," the constable said, with a nod, his voice low and wary. "The manor's just up the hill. You're the only one who can make sense of this." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing. "Where is the body?" "Up in the study. That's where they found her," the constable replied, pointing toward a large looming structure at the top of the hill, the Ravenshade Manor. Its silhouette seemed to disappear into the mist, as though it were a part of the fog itself. As Poirot walked toward the manor, the grandeur of the building became apparent. The manor was centuries old, its stone walls aged and cracked by time, ivy creeping up along the sides like nature's quiet claim. The door, a heavy oak affair, creaked as the constable opened it, revealing the darkened interior. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and old wood, and a fire burned faintly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. At the center of the study lay the body of a woman, her face pale, her eyes wide open, in a final, terrified expression. She was dressed in a flowing black gown, her hair elegantly arranged. Though now disheveled as though she had been caught in a moment of struggle. Beside her was an overturned chair, and scattered papers littered the floor as if something had been hastily disturbed. The constable stepped back, allowing Poirot to examine the scene in his own meticulous manner. He crouched beside the body, his gloved hands gently touching the woman's wrist. "No signs of struggle?" he muttered to himself, his voice soft but authoritative. "No wounds, no visible bruising. Yet, her expression tells a story of fear." Poirot's gaze flickered toward the scattered papers. One in particular caught his eye, a letter, half crumpled and bearing strange symbols along its edges. The letter was written in a language Poirot did not recognize immediately, but the symbols were unmistakable, arcane, mysterious, and decidedly unsettling. "Who is she?" Poirot asked, without turning his head. "Lady Eliza Marlowe," the constable answered, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "A renowned spiritualist. She's been a fixture in the village for years, helping the townsfolk with well, guiding them, seances, readings, all that. But her reputation, sir, it's not all it seems. People said she dabbled in things better left untouched. Poirot's lips twitched upward. A spiritualist, you say? A woman who seeks the beyond yet is trapped in this world. His eyes gleamed with curiosity. Tell me more about her, about what she did, who she knew. The constable hesitated. Not many will speak of her, sir. Some say she knew too much, that she crossed lines no one should, and Poirot pressed. And some say she was cursed. That her gift was more of a burden than a blessing. People whispered she invited something into her life. Poirot stood, brushing the dust from his gloves. He glanced around the room once more, as though looking for something he couldn't quite name. Curious, isn't it? He murmured. A woman who invites the spirits into her home, yet is found dead. Without a mark on her, but with an expression so filled with terror. It is as if the very air around her was too much to bear. He turned back to the constable, his expression one of quiet resolve. I shall require a full list of everyone who was in the manor in the days leading up to her death. No stone unturned, no detail too small. We are dealing with a mind far more complex than it appears at first glance. As Poirot prepared to leave the room, he paused, a sudden thought creeping into his mind. His gaze lingered on the strange letter. The symbols on it were not random. They were a key. He could feel it in his bones. The mystery of Lady Eliza Marlowe's death had only just begun. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. The next morning, the sun fought to break through the heavy cloud cover that had hung over Ravenshade for days, but the light was weak, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the land with a foreboding presence. Hercule Poirot stood in the parlor of Ravenshade Manor, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the room. The manor was as cold and eerie as the moors outside, its old furniture draped in sheets, remnants of a time long past. The fire had long since burned out, leaving behind only the scent of smoke and ash. Poirot stood alone, the constable having gone to fetch the list of people who had been in the manor in the days leading up to Lady Eliza Marlowe's death. As Poirot walked through the house, his footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. He passed portraits of long-dead ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow him with judgment and curiosity, and he could not help but feel that the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for him to uncover the truth. The house itself seemed alive with secrets, its creaking floors, the whisper of the wind through cracks in the windows, the lingering chill in the air, all felt like the ghosts of the past were watching, waiting for their chance to be heard. Poirot's mind was already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Lady Eliza Marlowe had been no ordinary woman. A spiritualist, yes. But there was something more to her than met the eye, something far darker. The manner of her death, so calm, so eerily untouched, struck him as odd. Not a single mark on her body, but an expression of terror frozen on her face. And the strange symbols on the letter, they were not just scribbles, they were a message, and Poirot knew they would be the key to solving the mystery. He examined the rest of the study where Lady Marlowe had been found. Papers scattered across the floor, some half crumpled, some neatly arranged, an organized chaos that told its own story. Poirot knelt down and picked up a piece of paper that had caught his attention earlier. It was a letter from a local woman written in a flowing script. It seemed innocuous at first, but Poirot's sharp eye caught a faint symbol at the bottom, an intricate spiral that resembled the patterns he had seen on the mysterious letter. He didn't need to be told that it was not a coincidence. Lady Marlowe had been in contact with someone, and this symbol was a sign of that connection. But who? A light knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The constable entered carrying a worn leather-bound book. "Sir Poirot, the list of people who've been to the manor recently," he said, setting it down on the table. "It's not much, but it's all we've got." Poirot flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he scanned the names. There were only a handful of people, none of whom seemed particularly suspicious at first glance. The list included local villagers, friends and colleagues of Lady Marlowe, but there was one name that stood out: Arthur Baines. He was a name whispered with reverence in Ravenshade, a man known for his occult studies and mysterious work with the spiritual world. Poirot tapped the name with his finger, a smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Arthur Baines," he muttered to himself. "I believe you might be the first person I need to speak with." Later that afternoon, Poirot found himself standing in front of a modest cottage on the edge of the village. The air was damp, the ground slippery with the remnants of a passing drizzle. The cottage was small, but well kept, with ivy crawling up the sides and a faint aroma of herbs wafting from the window. There was no mistaking it. This was the home of Arthur Baines, the occultist. Poirot knocked at the door, and after a moment it creaked open. A man of medium height stood before him. His appearance unremarkable, but for the intensity in his dark eyes. Arthur Baines was no older than 30, but his face was lined with the wear of someone who had spent too long looking into the unknown. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, I presume?" Baines's voice was smooth but strained, as though he had been expecting this meeting for some time. "Please, come in. I've heard about Lady Marlowe's death. Terrible business." Poirot stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. The cottage was filled with bookshelves, stacked with esoteric texts, occult artifacts, and strange symbols painted on the walls. A crystal ball sat atop a small wooden table, surrounded by candles and incense. It was a place where the living and the dead seemed to be in constant conversation, a place steeped in the mystic arts. "I trust you're familiar with Lady Marlowe?" Poirot asked, as he sat down in a chair, his posture always impeccable. "Of course," Baines replied, lighting a cigarette with slow precision. "She and I, well, we shared an interest in the unseen world. We often exchanged thoughts, consulted one another about spiritual matters. But I can't say I know anything about her death. She was different in the last few days. A bit distant, perhaps. She seemed to be expecting something or someone, though she didn't say who." Poirot studied Baines carefully. His demeanor was calm, but there was a hint of nervousness in the way he smoked his cigarette, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. "Expecting someone? Was it you she was expecting?" Baines flinched, and for a moment, Poirot could see the briefest flash of something, guilt, fear, in his eyes. I don't know. I didn't speak with her in the days leading up to her death. I can't say what was on her mind." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "Mr. Baines, I believe you know more than you are letting on. I've seen the signs, symbols on the letters she sent to me, the ones you are familiar with. Now I ask you again, who was Lady Marlowe expecting?" Baines shifted uneasily, his hands fumbling with the cigarette. He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. "I don't know exactly, but there was someone she was trying to summon. She spoke of an ancient being, something powerful." Something that could change everything. I told her it was dangerous, that she should stop, but she insisted. Poirot's mind was already racing. A dangerous entity? He murmured to himself. This is not just a murder, then. This is a warning. Baines looked up at him, his eyes wide with fear. You must stop this, Poirot. It's too late to save her, but maybe you can stop whatever she started. Poirot stood, his decision made. I will find the truth, Mr. Baines, and I will stop this, whatever it is. I promise you that. As he turned to leave, the weight of the mystery pressed down on him, and Poirot felt the unmistakable chill of the unknown creeping closer. The game had begun in earnest, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until the final piece of this puzzle was in place. Chapter 3. Secrets Unveiled. The next morning, the fog had thickened around Ravenshade, wrapping the village in a cold, damp embrace. The air was still, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Poirot stood by the window of his room in Ravenshade Manor, looking out over the moors. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast sea of gray that seemed to mirror the uncertainty that had clouded his thoughts since Lady Eliza Marlowe's mysterious death. The more he uncovered, the more the puzzle pieces refused to fit together. The strange symbols in the letter, Arthur Baines's cryptic warnings, Lady Marlowe's obsession with the supernatural, they were all part of something far larger than a simple murder. Poirot could feel the weight of it, like an unseen hand tightening around him, urging him to push deeper, to find the truth that lay hidden beneath layers of deception and fear. He turned away from the window, the stillness of the room pressing in on him. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. The constable entered, carrying a heavy file under his arm. Sir Poirot, I've got something you need to see. Poirot nodded, his curiosity piqued. He motioned for the constable to sit as he opened the file. It was filled with pages of handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, and old records. At the top of the first page was the name of a local family, the Greys. The Greys? Poirot asked, glancing up at the constable. They're well known in the village, the constable replied, sitting down across from him. And their connection to Lady Marlowe isn't a friendly one. Mr. Reginald Grey, the head of the family, and Lady Marlowe. They had a falling out some time ago. People say it was over money, but there's something else, something darker, a rift that runs deeper than anyone cares to talk about. Poirot's interest was piqued. Go on. The constable continued. A few months ago, there was a terrible argument between Lady Marlowe and Reginald. Word is, she accused him of trying to steal something from her, something she held very dear. No one knows exactly what it was, but it's said that Reginald's anger was so intense that it's left a permanent mark on their relationship. Ever since then, Lady Marlowe became different. More distant, more erratic. People started noticing strange things. Voices in the night, odd rituals at the manor. Some even claimed to see shadows moving in the windows when no one was supposed to be there. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You say the Greys were involved, but the name Baines keeps coming up. Why? The constable hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was headed. The Greys and Baines, they have history too. Reginald Grey was one of the few who knew about Baines's occult practices. They shared a mutual interest in things that normal folks shouldn't meddle with. But when Lady Marlowe got involved, things changed. Reginald felt threatened, and Baines became a rival. It's said that Lady Marlowe and Baines had an affair of sorts. More than just business, but not quite love either. They were both looking for something they thought the other could help them find. Poirot sat back in his chair, his mind racing. So, it was all connected. Lady Marlowe's death, her rivalry with Reginald Grey, the strange relationship with Baines, and the mysterious symbols. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the bigger question remained. What had they been searching for? "I need to speak with Reginald Grey," Poirot said, his voice firm. "And I also need to know everything about Lady Marlowe's will. If there is something valuable at the heart of this, whether it's money or knowledge, we need to understand what they were after." Later that day, Poirot made his way to the Grey family estate, a sprawling manor on the edge of the village. The house loomed like a dark silhouette against the overcast sky, its windows like black eyes watching from the shadows. The front door opened to reveal a tall, thin man, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. Reginald Grey stood before him, a man who looked like he had been born to command. "Sir Poirot, I presume?" Grey's voice was smooth, laced with an edge of authority. "I've heard much about you." "Come to solve a mystery, have you?" Poirot didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've come to speak to you about Lady Marlowe's death. I believe you may know more about her recent activities than you're letting on." Grey's eyes flickered just for a moment before he recovered his composure. "I had no love for Lady Marlowe, but I would never have wanted her dead. What you're suggesting is preposterous." Poirot studied him for a long moment. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply asking questions. It's my job to find the truth. Now tell me about your disagreement with Lady Marlowe. What exactly happened between you two?" Reginald Grey's face darkened, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion, anger perhaps, passed over his features. "She was an ungrateful woman. I tried to help her, tried to get her to see reason, but she was obsessed with things that no one should ever obsess over." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She thought she could control the forces of the universe. She was looking for something ancient, something powerful. She thought Baines could help her find it. But she was wrong. No one should tamper with those things." Poirot's mind raced. "What was it she was looking for, Mr. Grey? What did she believe she could control?" Grey's face twisted in frustration, but he said nothing. Poirot pressed on. "Was it in her will? Was that what you were fighting over?" Reginald Grey finally looked away, his gaze distant. "I'm not going to discuss her will." "That's none of your business, Poirot. But I'll tell you this. If she was looking for power, she found it, and now it's too late for all of us." Poirot stood in silence for a long moment, considering Grey's words. "Too late for all of us?" Poirot repeated quietly. "Do you mean to say that there are others who are in danger, Mr. Grey? Who else is involved in this?" Grey's eyes hardened, and he stepped back, his posture rigid. "You're asking the wrong questions, Poirot. The danger is much greater than you understand. Some things are better left buried." Poirot left Grey's estate with more questions than answers. The man was hiding something, and Poirot knew that he wasn't going to get any further answers from him. But the mention of power and something ancient struck a chord. Lady Marlowe had been looking for something beyond the physical realm, something that even Baines couldn't control. And Reginald Grey's warning that the danger was too late stirred a sense of urgency in Poirot. The stakes were higher than ever, and the shadows of Ravenshade seemed to be closing in around him. Back at Ravenshade Manor, Poirot pored over the records and letters once more. He would need to find Lady Marlowe's will, and he would need to see Baines again. But he also had a new lead: the symbols. They were not just a language, they were part of something bigger, something far older than anything he had encountered before. Poirot knew one thing for sure. He had to stop whatever it was that Lady Marlowe had unleashed. The game was far from over, and the real danger had only just begun. Chapter 4. Supernatural Suspicions. The sun had barely risen, casting pale light over the moors, and yet Hercule Poirot was already deep in thought, seated at the polished oak table in the dimly lit library of Ravenshade Manor. The clues were multiplying, each more mysterious than the last. Lady Eliza Marlowe's death was not a simple murder, it was the culmination of something darker, something that reached beyond the realm of ordinary understanding. Poirot had always been a man of logic, but this case was different. There were elements in play that defied even his meticulous mind. And yet, the evidence pointed in one direction: the supernatural. He'd spent the last few hours reading through Lady Marlowe's journals and letters, searching for any indication of what she might have been seeking, what had driven her to invite death into her life. The journals, filled with ramblings about spirits and forces unseen, were hard to interpret, but one phrase appeared repeatedly, scrawled with frantic urgency: "The gateway is near. I will open it, for the answers lie beyond." Poirot felt the familiar stirrings of unease. What had Lady Marlowe been trying to open? What gateway? The supernatural had long been a subject of skepticism for him, but even the most logical of minds could not deny the weight of the signs in front of him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. The constable entered, carrying a weathered envelope in his hands. "Sir Poirot," he began, his voice low, "you'll want to see this." Poirot took the envelope with a measured hand and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, covered in strange symbols. Unlike the ones from the earlier letters, these were more intricate, more ancient. Each curve and line seemed deliberate, as though drawn by someone with knowledge far beyond that of a typical occultist. The constable leaned in. "It was found in the garden near Lady Marlowe's study." Someone must have dropped it during the night. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Who found it?" "One of the gardeners." He didn't think much of it, but when he saw the symbols, he brought it to me. Poirot held the parchment up to the light, studying the intricate carvings. His eyes flicked from one symbol to another, each one resonating with a disturbing familiarity. This wasn't just some occult language, it was a specific ritual, one that he recognized from his brief studies into ancient rites, though he could not place where he had seen it before. "Mr. Constable," Poirot said, his voice cold, "I need you to gather everyone who was at the manor during the past week, especially the servants. Someone in this house knows more than they are letting on." That afternoon, Poirot met with the household staff, each one of them appearing uneasy under his unyielding gaze. There was Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper, a stout woman who kept her eyes averted. Mr. Holden, the butler, who stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable, and the gardeners, William and Hannah, who were visibly nervous but kept quiet under Poirot's penetrating scrutiny. "Tell me about the goings-on in the house in the days leading up to Lady Marlowe's death," Poirot began. "I've heard whispers, strange noises in the night, unusual behavior. Don't be afraid. I am here to uncover the truth, not to blame you." The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances before Mrs. Fletcher spoke up, her voice trembling. Lady Marlowe, she wasn't herself, sir. The last week she locked herself in the study for hours, muttering to herself. There were strange sounds, like chanting or maybe whispers. We couldn't make it out. Mr. Holden, the butler, cleared his throat. I heard it too. I thought it was just the wind at first, but it was different. A sort of rhythmic murmuring. It happened every night. I tried to ask her what was going on, but she just waved me off. She wouldn't speak of it. Poirot felt a chill run down his spine. And the symbols? He asked, watching their reactions carefully. Mrs. Fletcher flinched. We saw her drawing them, sir. On the walls of the study and in the garden. No one dared ask her what they meant. We just kept our distance. Poirot's mind raced. Lady Marlowe had been performing rituals. Ancient, dangerous rituals. But why? What was she trying to summon? What had she unleashed? He looked at each member of the staff in turn. And no one thought to stop her? No one thought to intervene? William, the gardener, spoke up, his voice thick with fear. We did, sir. But she insisted that we leave her to her work. She said it was important that we'd never understand. But we couldn't help her. She was beyond us. Poirot stood, his eyes narrowing. Beyond you, yes, but not beyond me. Later that evening, Poirot found himself once again standing in the study where Lady Marlowe had died. The air was still and cold, and the silence of the room felt oppressive, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Poirot's eyes fell on the floor where Lady Marlowe's body had been discovered. There, amidst the scattered papers, he noticed something that had previously escaped his notice. A small vial, hidden underneath a pile of books. He carefully retrieved it, noting the odd symbol etched into its surface. It was the same symbol he had seen on the parchment from earlier. Poison, Poirot mused aloud, turning the vial over in his hands. It was filled with the clear liquid, and though it seemed harmless enough at first glance, Poirot had learned long ago not to trust appearances. He glanced back toward the desk, and there, under the lamp's light, he saw it. An old book, its pages yellowed with age. It was open to a page that seemed strangely relevant to everything that had been happening. Poirot began to read aloud under his breath. To open the gate is to invite that which sleeps beyond the stars. Beware, for once the path is crossed, there is no turning back. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary book. This was a guide to an ancient ritual, one that involved opening a gateway to another realm. Lady Marlowe had not been simply trying to communicate with the dead. She had been attempting to open a door to something far more dangerous. His hand tightened around the vial. She didn't just die, did she? He muttered to himself. She was taken. The realization hit him with the force of a blow. Lady Marlowe hadn't been murdered in the traditional sense. No, she had opened the door herself, and in doing so, had invited something into this world, something that had claimed her life in return. Poirot turned swiftly on his heel, a renewed sense of urgency gripping him. The game had changed. He wasn't just solving a murder. He was dealing with something far darker, something that defied all his previous understandings. The ritual had been completed, but the consequences had yet to be fully realized, and whatever it was that Lady Marlowe had summoned was not done yet. Chapter 5. Red Herrings. The days following Lady Eliza Marlowe's death were thick with tension and unease. Poirot had uncovered more than he had bargained for. Mysterious symbols, ancient rituals, and an unsettling sense that something far darker than a simple murder was at play. But the deeper he dug, the more the trail seemed to twist and turn, each new clue leading him down a path that didn't quite fit the pieces he already had. The more he questioned the villagers, the more contradictions arose. Some spoke of Lady Marlowe's obsession with the occult. Others claimed she had been a kind and gentle woman, one who had only recently become consumed by strange behavior. Some swore they had seen shadows moving behind her windows, while others insisted it was just the gloom of Ravenshade playing tricks on their minds. Everyone had a different story to tell, and none of them seemed to fit together. Poirot stood in the parlor of Ravenshade Manor once more, staring out the window at the fog that had rolled in from the moors. The wind howled, rattling the windows, but it only seemed to deepen the silence that hung over the house. The shadows seemed to gather in the corners of the room, as though watching, waiting for something. The constable entered with a new batch of information, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Sir Poirot, I've spoken with the villagers again. There's something you need to hear." Poirot turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" The constable hesitated, clearly uneasy. "It's about Baines, Arthur Baines, the occultist. People are starting to talk. They say he's been seen leaving the manor the night before Lady Marlowe died, and there's talk of him being involved in something much more dangerous than anyone realized." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And what precisely does this have to do with Lady Marlowe's death?" "That's just it," the constable said, voice low. "There's a rumor. They say Lady Marlowe and Baines had a falling out, a fight of sorts. Some say she was going to expose him for something terrible." Poirot's curiosity was piqued. "Expose him for what?" The constable shook his head, a shadow of doubt flickering in his eyes. "No one's sure, sir. Some say it was a financial dispute, others that it was something more sinister, something to do with the rituals they were both obsessed with. But the fact is, people saw him leave the manor that night, and they think he may have been involved in her death." No. Poirot stood silently for a moment, considering the information. Baines was a man of many secrets, and Poirot had long suspected that his involvement in the occult was more than just a passing interest. If there had been a falling out between Baines and Lady Marlowe, it could explain why Baines had been at the manor, perhaps to intimidate her, or even to stop her from going further with the ritual. But then, why had Baines not acted earlier? Why wait until now? Was it the ritual itself that had gone wrong? Was that the catalyst for her death? "I need to speak with Mr. Baines again," Poirot said at last, his voice firm, "and I need to speak with him alone." It was late in the afternoon when Poirot made his way to Baines's cottage. The light was waning, casting long shadows across the village. The air felt thick with anticipation, and as Poirot knocked on the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was about to change. The door creaked open, and Baines stood in the doorway, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. There was something different about him, an air of tension, of dread, that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Baines said, his voice strained but polite. "What brings you back to my humble abode?" Poirot wasted no time on pleasantries. "I need to ask you more questions about your relationship with Lady Marlowe. There are things I don't understand, things that don't add up." Baines stepped aside, allowing Poirot to enter. The cottage was dimly lit. The smell of incense thick in the air, and the shelves were once again lined with occult texts. The atmosphere felt heavier than before, as though the very air in the room had become saturated with something unspoken. "You've heard the rumors, I presume?" Baines said, his voice barely a whisper, as he motioned toward the small table, where he had set up a few books. "People are starting to talk about my involvement in Lady Marlowe's death." "Yes," Poirot replied, his voice calm but insistent. "And what do you say about that?" Baines's gaze dropped to the floor, his fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the table. I don't know what to say. Yes, I was there the night she died. Yes, we argued, but I didn't kill her. I would never kill her." His voice cracked, a hint of desperation creeping into his words. Poirot leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Why did you argue then? What was so important that you had to see her that night?" Baines hesitated, his lips twitching as if he were weighing his words carefully. She was obsessed, Poirot. Obsessed with power, with something she didn't fully understand. She thought she could control the forces she was summoning, that she could open a door to another realm and control what lay beyond. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She was determined. Poirot's mind began to race. "And when she died, was it an accident? Or was it something she invited in?" Baines shuddered, his face paling. "It wasn't an accident. She knew what she was doing. She opened the gateway and something came through. I tried to close it to stop it, but it was too late. And when I left the manor that night, I didn't realize how far gone she was." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Baines's words were chilling. This was not just a simple murder. Lady Marlowe had summoned something. Something that had taken her life as payment. "You must understand, Poirot," Baines said, his voice growing frantic. "I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. And now we're all in danger." Poirot stood up straight, his face grim. "What exactly did she open, Mr. Baines? What did she summon?" Baines looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. It wasn't supposed to work like that. The ritual was incomplete. But something answered her call, something old, and it doesn't care about us. It only cares about getting what it wants." Poirot left Baines's cottage with more questions than answers, the weight of Baines's confession pressing heavily on his mind. The occultist's words were unsettling, but they raised a new set of problems. If Lady Marlowe had truly opened a gateway, then the danger was far from over. The supernatural forces that had claimed her life could be far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the shrill cry of a bird in the distance. As he looked up at the darkening sky, he knew one thing for certain. The danger was not just to Lady Marlowe. It was to everyone in Ravenshade. The question was, who would be the next victim? Chapter 6. The twist. The following days were a blur of relentless investigation for Poirot, each step forward feeling more like a step into a shadowed abyss. The fog had not lifted from Ravenshade, nor had the village shaken off the haunting air that had settled over it. The constable had gathered more rumors from the villagers, each story more fragmented and contradictory than the last. It was as if the whole town had become a chorus of half-formed truths, each person offering just enough to muddy the waters further. But Poirot was not one to be swayed by rumors. He had seen enough of the world's darkness to know that there was always a pattern, a reason behind the chaos. The trick was finding it, the hidden connection that pulled everything into focus. Poirot stood in the library of Ravenshade Manor. the large fireplace crackling softly beside him, the warmth contrasting with the cool silence that had descended upon the house. It was late and the manor was quiet, as though even the house itself was waiting. The weight of the case hung heavily on Poirot's shoulders. The knowledge that Lady Marlowe had opened something, some gate, some doorway, and that something had come through with a hunger far beyond human comprehension, gnawed at him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. The constable entered, his face tense, his eyes darting nervously. "Sir Poirot, you need to come quickly. Something's happened." Poirot turned, his heart tightening with anticipation. "What is it?" The constable hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. "It's Mr. Gray, Reginald Gray. He's dead." Poirot's eyes flashed with surprise. "Dead? How?" "Suicide, it appears. They found him in his study this afternoon. A letter was left behind. It's all very strange. People say he knew too much, that he was connected to the dark arts." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Take me to him." Reginald Gray's study was a grim place. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dusty tomes, many of which appeared to be on occult subjects. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the air felt thick, weighed down by the sense of impending doom that had marked Lady Marlowe's death. Gray's body was slumped over his desk, his face buried in his arms, a letter clenched tightly in his hand. Poirot stepped forward, examining the scene with his usual methodical approach. There was no sign of struggle, no obvious wounds. Nothing that indicated foul play save for the unsettling fact that the man had ended his life in this manner. But Poirot could feel it, the subtle shift in the air. The death of Reginald Gray was no ordinary suicide. Something was at work here that went beyond despair or madness. The constable handed Poirot the letter. It was short, the handwriting cramped and frantic as if written in haste. "I have seen the truth. I know what Lady Marlowe awakened, and now it's too late. There's no escaping what's coming. We've all been marked, all of us. The gateway is open, and I fear nothing can close it again. The end is near. I pray I am wrong, but if I'm not, you must stop it." Poirot read the letter twice, his mind racing. The words were damning. Reginald Gray had known more than he had let on, and the fact that he had written the letter in such a state of panic confirmed it. The ritual, the gateway, it was real, and it had consequences far worse than anyone had anticipated. Poirot turned to the constable. "Where was Mr. Gray found?" "In his chair, slumped over the desk. It looks as though he fell forward while writing the letter." The letter was found beside him. Poirot's gaze darkened. "And there is no sign of any poison? No trace of anything unusual?" "None. The only thing strange is the letter." Poirot paused, thinking. "The letter says it's too late." "Too late for what, I wonder?" As Poirot left the study, his mind was whirling. Reginald Gray's death was no accident. It was a final warning, a desperate attempt to convey something that was already set in motion. But what exactly was that something? Poirot's thoughts shifted to the ritual. He had no doubt now that Lady Marlowe had not only opened a doorway, but had unleashed something far more dangerous than either she or Baines had realized. But there was more. Something in the letter had triggered a memory, a detail that Poirot had overlooked until now. The mention of marks, he returned to the manor's library and began scouring Lady Marlowe's journals once again. This time, his eyes skimmed past the ramblings about spirits and supernatural forces, until something caught his eye, an entry written just days before her death. "The mark has appeared. It's on my skin, and on Baines's too. It's a sign, a warning. I can feel it crawling beneath my flesh, but no one will listen. The others mustn't know. The mark, it means we've crossed the line. We've opened the door. There is no going back now. Poirot's blood ran cold. The mark. Of course, he had noticed the strange symbol on Lady Marlowe's body when he had examined her, the faint, almost imperceptible etching on her wrist. He had dismissed it at first, thinking it just a sign of the ritual, a symbol tied to the occult practices she had been involved with. But now he understood. This mark wasn't just part of the ritual, it was a mark of possession, a sign that whatever had come through had claimed its victim. Poirot's mind began to piece the puzzle together with terrifying clarity. The mark, the deaths, the gateway, it all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. The entity that had been summoned was not just a spirit or force from another realm. It was something far more powerful. And now it was free. The question remained. What was its endgame? That night, Poirot couldn't sleep. The weight of the case pressed heavily on his chest, each moment more urgent than the last. He sat in his room, staring at the fire, unable to shake the feeling that time was running out. He had to find the way to close the gateway, to stop whatever it was that Lady Marlowe had unwittingly invited into the world. He knew one thing for certain now. Reginald Grey's death had been no suicide. It had been another step in the entity's plan, and if Poirot didn't act quickly, there would be more deaths to come. The mark had already claimed 2 victims, and there were likely more to follow. But as the night deepened, a shiver ran down Poirot's spine. The feeling that he was being watched by something that was not of this world, grew stronger. Whatever was lurking in the shadows of Ravenshade had grown bolder, and Poirot realized that he was no longer just hunting a murderer. He was hunting something far older, far more powerful. The true danger had yet to reveal itself. Chapter 7. The Resolution. The village of Ravenshade was quieter now, the streets empty, the mist hanging thick in the air like a blanket that covered both the land and the minds of its people. They had heard the rumors, of course, the whispers that had begun long before Lady Marlowe's death and had only intensified after Reginald Grey's suicide. Talk of spirits, of ancient rituals, of something far worse than any ghost lurking in the shadows. But for Hercule Poirot, the quiet was maddening. The closer he got to the truth, the more elusive it seemed. He had spent the last few days combing through Lady Marlowe's journals, questioning anyone who might have answers, and yet, with each revelation it became clearer. The danger had not passed. It was still out there, waiting. Poirot stood in the library of Ravenshade Manor once again, the weight of the investigation pressing on his shoulders. His mind flickered back to the cryptic words of Reginald Grey's letter. "We've all been marked. The gateway is open and I fear nothing can close it again." And yet, despite everything, despite the odds, Poirot refused to believe that it was truly too late. He had faced insurmountable odds before, solving seemingly unsolvable cases, unmasking murderers who thought they could escape the law. This would be no different. It couldn't be. Poirot's gaze fell on the strange book he had uncovered in Lady Marlowe's study, the one that detailed the ancient ritual, the gateway, and the terrible consequences of tampering with forces beyond mortal understanding. The final ritual, the one that Lady Marlowe had attempted to complete, was incomplete, but it was not without a counteraction. There was still a chance. He had spent hours poring over the text, scanning every word, every symbol, and he had found it, hidden in the final pages, almost deliberately obscured. A way to close the gateway, to seal the door she had opened. It required sacrifice. Poirot's mind raced. He could already feel the threads of dread tightening around him as he thought of what the ritual would demand. Lady Marlowe had been willing to risk everything to unlock the door to another world. What if that door wasn't meant to be closed? What if the entity had already grown too powerful to stop? But no. Poirot had always believed that there was always a way. There was always a solution. Even in the face of the most terrifying mysteries, he just needed to act. And fast. That evening, Poirot gathered the few remaining people who had been at the manor during Lady Marlowe's final days. There was no time to waste. The gateway was still open, and with each passing moment, the entity from beyond would grow stronger. He needed their help. Baines was the first to arrive. The occultist was clearly in a state of distress, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the fear that had consumed him since Lady Marlowe's death. Poirot saw the man's unease, but he also saw his desperation. "I didn't think it was possible," Baines said, his voice strained as he sat down in front of Poirot. "I didn't think the gateway could be opened, not like that. Not by someone like her, but now it's open and nothing can stop it. No one can close it. We're all doomed." Poirot met his gaze with unflinching determination. "You are wrong, Mr. Baines. There is always a way, even in the darkest of times. We have the means to seal the gateway, if we act quickly." Baines looked at him with disbelief. "How? How can you possibly stop it?" Poirot glanced down at the book, then back at Baines. "The ritual she began is incomplete. But there is a counteraction, a way to close the door, but it will require sacrifice. A willingness to give something up to undo what was done." Baines's face went pale. "Sacrifice? What does that mean?" Poirot's expression hardened. "It means that we may have to give up something precious to stop this. Something that can seal the gateway for good." Before Baines could respond, the door opened and the constable entered. "Sir Poirot, we found something," he said, his voice tense. Poirot stood, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" The constable handed him another letter, this one hastily written, the ink smudged in places. It was addressed to Poirot from an anonymous source, someone who had apparently been observing the events unfold from the shadows. "If you are reading this, then you have come too late. The gateway cannot be closed. It will consume everything in its path. The entity is not what you think. It is not just a spirit or a force. It is something older, something primal. It is a will, a sentience that has existed for eons, waiting for a time like this. It will stop at nothing to achieve its purpose. The only way to stop it is to make the ultimate sacrifice, to offer something that is truly irreplaceable. If you do this, you might be able to seal the gateway, but it will require everything. Your soul, your essence, all that you are." Poirot's hands shook as he finished reading the letter. The implications were clear now. This wasn't just a simple supernatural force. This was something far more terrifying. A being with its own will, its own purpose, and it would stop at nothing to break through into this world. "Poirot, what does this mean?" Baines asked, his voice trembling. Poirot looked up, his expression grim. "It means that to stop this, someone will have to give up everything, something irreplaceable. But who? Who can sacrifice what is most precious to them?" The answer came to him in a moment of realization, a sudden clarity that cut through the fog of confusion. It wasn't the constable. It wasn't Baines. It was him. Poirot had always known that his mind was his greatest gift, his most valuable possession. He had spent his life solving puzzles, mysteries, and uncovering truths that others could not see. But now, that very gift would have to be given up in order to stop the entity that had been unleashed. "Mr. Baines," Poirot said, his voice low but steady, "I am the one who must perform the sacrifice." Baines stared at him in shock. "No, Poirot. There has to be another way. You can't—" "It is the only way," Poirot interrupted. "I cannot let this force enter our world. Not for all the answers in the universe. I will not allow it." As the ritual began, the room around Poirot seemed to warp and shift, the shadows growing longer, the air heavy with an otherworldly tension. Baines and the constable stood at a distance, watching in stunned silence. Poirot stood in front of the gateway, the book in his hands, the final words of the ritual ringing in his mind. He closed his eyes, focusing on the essence of his own being. His sharp mind, his reasoning, his logic, all the things that made him who he was. He felt it all slipping away, as though he were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into a chasm of nothingness. With a final breath, Poirot spoke the last incantation, and in that moment, he felt himself fade. His identity, his memories, his mind, everything that had defined him, it was gone, swept away by the ritual, leaving nothing but the silence that followed. The gateway closed. The following morning, the fog that had plagued Ravenshade for so long began to lift. The sun broke through the clouds and the air felt strangely lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the village. Poirot was gone. No one knew what had happened to him. The gateway had been sealed, but at a terrible cost. Baines and the constable stood in the now silent manor, each lost in their own thoughts. The case was solved, the threat had been stopped, but there was a heavy emptiness that lingered in the air. And somewhere in the deepest corners of their minds, they knew that they would never forget the price that had been paid to save them all.